The last entry in the patient journal was dated the day before we arrived. That detail took about 30 seconds to sink in, and in those 30 seconds, everything I thought I understood about that building collapsed. There were 4 of us. Urban exploration had been a hobby for about 3 years at that point. Me, my friend Joel, and 2 others we'd met through an online community dedicated to documenting abandoned structures. We were careful about it. We researched locations thoroughly, went in daylight whenever possible, never removed anything, and documented everything with cameras. It was about history as much as anything else, the particular kind of history that gets left behind when a place is abandoned mid-use. The Hargrove Psychiatric Institute had been closed since 1991. 32 years of vacancy. It was a substantial complex, a main building of 4 floors, 2 residential wings, a detached medical unit, and a groundskeeper's structure near the perimeter. The main building was in poor condition but structurally sound enough that we felt comfortable entering. The residential wings had partial roof failures, and we stayed out of them. We got in through a ground floor window on the east side that had lost its boarding at some point. The interior was exactly what you'd expect from a facility abandoned in a hurry, which is how Hargrove had closed, following a funding collapse and a state investigation into conditions that had resulted in a mandatory shutdown with very little transition time. Personal items still in rooms. Furniture still in place. Files still in offices. The kind of abandonment where the building just stopped one day and everyone walked out. The administrative office was on the ground floor near the main entrance. Standard institutional setup, front desk, waiting area, a corridor of offices behind it. Filing cabinets, most of them still locked. A reception desk with a telephone and an appointment book open to a week in October 1991. Joel found the patient intake journal in the records room behind the main office. It was a large bound ledger, the kind institutions used before digital records, columns for patient name, admission date, ward assignment, attending physician, and status. Hundreds of entries spanning what looked like decades of operation. He flipped to the back to see the last entries. The final pages covered the last few months before the closure. The handwriting changed as you moved through them, different staff members logging admissions over the years. The last entries from 1991 were sparse, reflecting the winding down of operations. The final official entry was dated September 14, 1991, a patient discharge. Then there was a gap of blank lines. And then, in handwriting that was noticeably different from any of the preceding entries, cleaner, more deliberate, there were new entries. Not from 1991. Recent entries. Names, dates, ward assignments written in the same column format as the original records. 6 entries total. The dates span the past 3 weeks. The last entry was dated the previous day. We stood around that ledger for a long time without saying much. The rational explanations cycled through quickly, other explorers who'd come through and added fake entries as a prank, someone using the building for their own purposes and maintaining the journal as some kind of performance. Both of those were possible. Neither of them felt complete. I photographed every page of the recent entries. The names meant nothing to me. I checked later and found no obvious matches to real people. The ward assignments referenced wards by letter designation, matching the original system used by the facility. Whoever had written them knew how the intake process had worked. The attending physician listed on all 6 recent entries was the same name, a doctor. Emil Voss. I cross-referenced it against the original entries going back through the journal. Dr. Emil Voss had been listed as attending physician on admissions from 1974 through 1989. I found his obituary. He had died in 2003. We left the building about 20 minutes after Joel found the journal. Not in a panic, we finished our documentation of the ground floor and walked out the way we'd come in. But the conversation on the drive back was different from the usual debrief, quieter. Less of the enthusiastic comparison of photographs and observations that usually followed a good location. About a week later, Joel messaged me late at night. He said he'd been going through his photos from Hargrove and found something he hadn't noticed at the time. In one of his wide shots of the main corridor, taken when we'd first entered the building, there was a door at the far end of the hallway that was slightly open. He said he was certain that door had been closed when we'd walked past it on our way out. I went back through my own photos. I had a shot of the same corridor taken about 40 minutes later. The door was closed. Something had opened it while we were in the building, and closed it again before we left. The house had been on the market for 14 months when my agency assigned it to me. That's a long time for a property in that neighborhood, good school district, quiet street, nothing structurally wrong with the building. The price had been reduced twice. My supervisor told me to just show it, that sometimes houses take time and not to overthink it. I am a professional. I have shown properties with histories that would make most people uncomfortable, and I have done so without letting any of it affect my presentation. I say that so you understand that what I'm about to describe is something I've thought about carefully, that I have tried very hard to explain away, and that I have not been able to. The first showing was a couple in their early 30s. I arrived 20 minutes early to do a walkthrough and make sure everything was presentable. The house had been vacant for over a year, and the listing agency had arranged for periodic maintenance, so it was clean and in reasonable order. I went room by room on the ground floor, checking windows, adjusting blinds, the standard pre-showing routine. In the living room, there was a large decorative mirror above the fireplace. It had been turned to face the wall. I assumed it had been moved during the last maintenance visit, possibly to prevent glare for photographs or for some other practical reason. I turned it back around, straightened it, and continued my walkthrough. The dining room had a smaller mirror on the east wall. Also facing the wall, I turned it around. The downstairs bathroom had a medicine cabinet with a mirrored door. The door had been opened and rotated, so the mirror faced the interior of the cabinet rather than the room. I closed it to its normal position. By the time I got to the master bedroom and found the full-length mirror in the corner with its face pressed against the wall, I had stopped assuming maintenance visits and started paying closer attention. 7 mirrors in that house. All of them turned to face away from the room. Every single one. I photographed each one before I turned them around. I didn't have time to think through the implications. The clients were arriving in 15 minutes. The showing went fine. The couple liked the space, asked good questions, said they'd be in touch. After they left, I called the property manager who handled the maintenance and asked whether any of his team had moved the mirrors. He said no. He said none of his people would rearrange decor items. He said the mirrors hadn't been touched during any of his team's visits. I asked him when the last visit had been. He checked his records and said 10 days earlier. Someone had turned all 7 mirrors to face the wall within the past 10 days. In a locked, vacant property. I documented everything in a formal note to my supervisor and suggested the property be checked for signs of unauthorized entry. A locksmith inspected all points of entry and found nothing, no evidence of tampering, no broken locks, no forced windows. The house was secure. I had 2 more showings scheduled for the following week. Before the first one, I arrived early again and did my walkthrough. All 7 mirrors were facing the wall. I had turned them all around 8 days earlier. In a locked house with no signs of entry, they had been turned back. I turned them around again. The showing proceeded normally. I said nothing to the clients. After the second showing that week, I was doing a final check before locking up when I stopped in the master bedroom doorway. The full-length mirror in the corner had been turned around at some point during the showing, while the clients and I were in the house. I had not done it. The clients, a retired couple who had been within my line of sight for almost the entire visit, had not gone into that bedroom alone. I locked the house and left. I filed a request with my agency to have the listing reassigned. I cited personal scheduling conflicts. I did not explain the real reason. The house sold 4 months later. I don't know if whoever bought it was told about the mirrors. I don't know if the new owners have noticed anything. What I know is that every time I drive past that street now, I think about what it means that something in that house kept turning the mirrors away. And what it didn't want to see. The town of Calico Creek, Nevada doesn't appear on any map I've been able to find. I've searched every database, every historical record, every satellite image of the region where I drove that afternoon. Nothing. And yet I spent nearly 2 hours walking its streets, going in and out of its buildings, and finding something in one of them that I have no explanation for. I was doing a solo road trip through the Southwest, one of those loose, unscheduled trips where you follow whatever looks interesting from the highway. I'd taken a state route off the main highway because I'd seen a sign for a scenic overlook and had a few hours to spare. The overlook was worth it, a wide basin view, red rock formations, the particular quality of late afternoon desert light that doesn't photograph as well as it looks in person. On the way back to the highway, I passed a turnoff I'd missed going the other direction. A dirt road with a hand-painted sign that said Calico Creek, ESD, 1887. No distance marker, no indication of what was there. I had time and four-wheel drive and a long-standing interest in ghost towns, so I turned off. The road ran about 1.5 miles before the town appeared. A main street of maybe 12 structures, a general store, what had clearly been a saloon, a post office building, several smaller structures that could have been residences or workshops, and at the far end, a larger building with the remnants of a sign that I couldn't fully make out. It had the feel of a town that had been abandoned for a long time, but maintained more recently, not by inhabitants, but by someone who wanted it preserved. The structures were in better condition than ghost towns of comparable age usually are. No graffiti. No obvious vandalism. The interiors I looked into were dusty but intact. The general store was the most complete. Shelving still in place, a counter with an old mechanical register, a few scattered items that hadn't been worth taking when whoever left had departed. Near the back of the store there was a small living area, a table, 2 chairs, a shelf of personal items. On this shelf was a photograph album. I picked it up the way you pick up anything in a place like that, carefully, aware that it was old and that whatever it contained was the last record of people who had been here. The cover was leather, dry and cracked. The pages inside were thick cardstock with photographs mounted in the style of the late 19th and early 20th century, formal portraits, group photos, images of the town itself in what appeared to be its active years. I went through it slowly, the way you do when you're looking at a community's visual history. Faces I didn't know, places that matched the buildings I just walked through, a record of ordinary life in an isolated desert settlement. I was near the back of the album when I turned a page and stopped breathing for a moment. There was a photograph of me. Not someone who looked like me. Not a resemblance that required interpretation. A photograph mounted in the same cardstock style as every other image in the album, with the same aged quality, the same tonal range of an old print of me, my face. My features. My particular combination of characteristics that I have never seen replicated in another person. I was standing in front of the general store. The store I had walked into 20 minutes earlier. I was wearing clothing that was not mine, period appropriate to the album, late 1800s or early 1900s, entirely inconsistent with anything I owned or had ever worn. I was not smiling. I was looking at the camera with an expression that I can only describe as the expression of someone who knows something the photographer does not. I stood in that store for a long time. I turned the photograph over. On the back, in faded pencil and a handwriting that was not mine, was a name I did not recognize and a date, September 1902. I took out my phone and photographed the page. I set the album back on the shelf exactly where I'd found it. I walked out of the store, got back in my car, and drove back to the main road. I have shown the photograph on my phone to 7 people. Every single one of them confirms it is my face. No one has an explanation. I've been back to that turnoff twice since then. Both times the dirt road is there. Both times it runs for about 1.5 miles into the desert. Both times there is nothing at the end of it, no town. No buildings, no sign. Just the basin and the red rock and the particular quality of desert light that doesn't photograph as well as it looks.